Hey, greetings. This is week 4, and this is lecture 4 of 5. We've got one more lecture after this, and then we will move into next week's as a continuation of this week as we talk about missional leadership. So, a reminder of where we are thus far. We've asked some questions. We've analyzed the kinds of molds and methods of leadership that have been maybe the default assumptions of our minds, where we think about leadership as this sort of hierarchical control, someone who has the right charisma, gifts, capabilities, wisdom that can dictate and determine the outcomes of an organization based upon previous success, organizational capacity, systems that they've developed, one's ability to discern the natural law or the ways in which this world works. But we've also talked about that we've now moved into an era where that doesn't seem to hold sway in the same kind of way that it once did. So it's going to require a different kind of leader, the kind of leader who, instead of stands on top, flip that over, comes alongside, empowers, develops, collaborates well and enables people to live that out. Now, before I get into the actual content of this lecture, which is to discuss Nehemiah in the kind of leadership that we see in the person of Nehemiah, I want to point you to two little videos that are also attached to this lecture set. And they're videos that I think demonstrate my passion for leadership. I think you can tell a lot about a person by the kinds of characters that they're drawn to in movies. And I have 3 characters that I'm most often drawn to. Mr. Holland's Opus is one of those. But the other 2 are the videos that you're seeing there on this set of lectures. The first one is Dead Poets Society. The leader is Dr. Keating, who is of course, played by Robin Williams. He comes to this boarding school of young men whose lives have been sort of prescribed for them according to the expectations of others. And so they're falling in line. And then Keating shows up as this disruptive force in their lives, trying to awaken them to their unique place and their unique role and what is going to lead towards a fulfilling life for each one of them. And I want you to take a look at that video. There's this scene, there's this moment in quoting a Walt Whitman poem where he says, "The powerful play goes on that each might contribute a verse." And for me, that's the heart of what leadership looks like. It's helping people discover the unique verse that they will contribute to this ongoing drama of God's redemption that is happening all around us. The second video is the video from the movie The Legend of Bagger Vance. And Will Smith is playing a caddy for Juna, which has been a golfer by the name of Matt Damon, who basically, in a sense, loses his swing when he goes off to war. He comes back, he can't play golf in the same kind of way that he once did. He was once this up-and-coming, this rising star, and he can't play golf anymore. But then his name hits this exhibition game match that he's supposed to be a part of, and then out of the blue, this caddy by the name of Will Smith, or by the name of Bagger Vance, played by Will Smith, shows up. And there's this telling scene when he's standing on the green trying to teach this young boy how to caddy, where he talks about the authentic swing. And I think, again, watch that video, because for me that has something to do with leadership. It's about coming alongside of the people that we work with and helping them get a sense of what their authentic swing is, living into that authentic swing. Because I believe that if each of the members of the organization are living out their greatest potential, and we have a collaborative sense of what the vision of God is for the work that we are called to do, we get so much more out of people and so much more buy-in, and they don't feel as though they're just simply cogs in a machine that we've created, but they're participants, full participants in living out the purposes and passions. This empowerment model is going to run throughout this whole of what we do, because I think this is what is lacking. I think in our professionalization of ministry, which we talked about a few weeks ago, this idea that we hire people to do this kind of work, the idea that you have to be an expert on something, that you have had to go to school, that you got to have a certain title or position, that you got to find yourself somewhere on that hierarchy of power, I think strips people of the unique set of gifts and graces that they have to be afforded into the life of ministry and the life of mission. And so I want you to look at those videos alongside of this particular lecture and give some thought about what are your images as you begin to think through your philosophy of ministry, which you're going to develop and you're going to type up and you're going to turn in on the 6th week. You need to begin to think through, if we're in this shift, what is this philosophy of ministry going to look like in terms of empowerment? And hopefully over the course of these 2 weeks, this is going to become clearer and clearer as we go. So I want to talk a little bit about the leadership of Nehemiah, and not that he embodies everything that we're trying to talk about, but he does embody a lot of what I want to talk about. And I think for me, his story uniquely, as I worked with it within the congregation that I just recently served in Pekin, Illinois, his story became a great help to me in terms of leveraging what I had within a congregation and moving us towards some sort of redemptive participation in what God was up to in a very broken community. So you have Nehemiah, who of course is cupbearer of the king. He's disconnected from the world in Jerusalem in the sense that he's living really very much in the lap of luxury. Again, he's a servant to the king, but the cupbearer would have held a unique place of almost being counselor to the king. He's wherever the king is. He's in on every conversation. He's a key part of the cabinet of what the king has all around him. And so this is the world that Nehemiah lives in the midst of this Babylonian exile and the trials and the travails and the tribulations that the people still back in Jerusalem are facing. But then it gets word, and for me, this is where much of missional leadership gets started. Missional leadership really, for me, emerges on the front end of getting word or getting a sense of the brokenness that is around us, where our heart is in fact broken or shattered by what we see, or by the hopelessness we've seen all around us, or those places in which we just see the void of God's recognized redemptive passions being fulfilled in a community or amongst a group of people. When we get word, when that word stirs us down deep, not to pity, but into a sense of compassion, where we're moved by what we hear, right? And this is what happens to Nehemiah. Now, what I love about Nehemiah is that when he hears of the brokenness that happens in Jerusalem, he doesn't immediately set out, I've got to get a plan, I've got to get a vision, I've got to hire the right team so that we can fulfill fixing the problem that we see in front of us. No, the first thing I think this is a part of missional leadership, significant part of missional leadership, is it drives him to his knees. He finds himself crying out to God. Missional leadership for me not only hears of the brokenness, but immediately turns to God. This is a part of the missional schematic that we worked through last week. This idea that prayer and praise is at the heart of someone who's missionally engaged in this world, because only as we enter into the life of God do we have the capacity to enter into the world for the sake of God, right? And so it drives him to his knees, and then he goes to the king. And I love this. As he goes to the king to ask permission to be a part of the redemptive purposes of God, even before he says anything, he doesn't stand out in his bravado and his gusto with all his charisma, and he has in fact demonstrated a consistency of character that would make the king even ask questions about what is wrong with him. But then again he prays, and then he asks the king, and he entrusts the hand of God into what God is calling him to. And when the king then turns him loose to go back to Jerusalem, and with his blessing, but even more so than that, when Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem, he doesn't put on the superhero cape. And I think this is key, because too often I feel like leaders, we feel the pressure to be this superhero where we're going to swoop in and save the day. Instead, he jumps on a steed and he rides through the ruins of the walls surrounding Jerusalem, surveying the damage, surveying the brokenness, getting a sense of what is broken all around him. And I think, again, this is key for missional leadership. Missional leadership isn't because we have some great and glorious idea of what needs to happen. We don't know what needs to happen until we've landed there, until we've submerged ourselves, using the language of sentness, into that community, and where we've really got a sense of what's at stake here. And this is one of the moments that I did with my congregation, which became a really important moment for us. I built up front using cinder block a big broken down wall, and I was preaching through the message of Nehemiah, and I talked about him riding through the ruins to survey the damage. And I just acknowledged on the front end, at that point when I preached that message, I'd only been there for about 6 or 7 months. I said, I don't know your community like you do. I don't know this place like you do. I don't know I've got hunches about where the brokenness is to be found, but I don't know it all. And so I believe that you probably have seen and understand the brokenness of this community in ways that I don't even understand. So here's what we're going to do at the end. I'm going to invite you to come and just put a sticky note on these walls, and I want want you to name the brokenness. I want you to name the places where things have fallen apart in your community. And let's together begin to pray and dream about how we can engage those places and spaces of brokenness. And for me, it was amazing to watch people who might not have otherwise said a word begin to put these stick-it notes on the walls that were broken down there. And all of a sudden, there was this collective buy-in that now this isn't just what the pastor has seen. This is what we have seen about our community. And if we see it, that we're called to do something about it. That we now have to stand in and figure out what we're going to do. Our recovery ministry emerged out of what we had seen there, because we were living in a town where addiction ran rampant. We were the meth capital of Illinois, and yet there was not a significant, meaningful recovery program in our community. And we began to recognize that. And so the vision to start a recovery ministry wasn't because I was sitting in my office one day and had a really good idea. No, it was because I saw the heartache and the brokenness that were in the lives of my own people as they saw the brokenness that was existing in the community. And we together, collaboratively, needed to do something about that together. And so I think that's what happens. And once Nehemiah causes the others to see, he then marshals the resources that he has, whatever meager resources he has. He doesn't have a standing army. He doesn't have this highly qualified set of carpenters and masons. No, he has peasants and farmers and families, and he marshals them together, and together they collaboratively begin to work on doing this hard restorative work all around them. And they face, at multiple times throughout, they face discouragement from Sanballat and Tobiah. I love their story, and I think Nehemiah is a great story to look at in terms of the kinds of things that we're going to experience even as we missionally lead. It's not like once we get about the work of God, all of things are going to go smooth. No, in fact, Nehemiah gives evidence to the time and time again when he has to stand not as a hierarchical leader, but as a person of faith, where he has to hold on to God's directives and God's call upon his life and the life of his community, even in the face of obstruction, of objections from the enemies, even when things get a little dicey, even within the community itself, and people begin to try to take advantage of them, like Nehemiah chapter 5, where he has to stand in the gap on behalf of the most vulnerable. Again, these are elements in that are showing up over and over again throughout the story of the text, this sentence that we just finished reading about. And so I think Nehemiah's story for me is relevant to what we're kind of trying to talk about here. What does your heart break for? Has it driven to your knees in prayer? Have you submerged yourself to the point where even before you've decided what needs to change, that you have gotten a sense of what's around us? Where do we need to go? Have you been able to marshal people to see it as well, and to be able to dream creatively about how we collaboratively and together can make a difference as we move forward? Have you been willing to exercise the kind of faith to stay the long run, even in the face of great discouragement? And are you willing to have the hard conversations that are going to be necessary, even when things get dicey internally, when the mission seems threatened not by the outside, but by what's happening inside, to be able to say, no, we're going to stand in the gap. We're going to do what's right. We're going to be a people whose virtue and character carries us through the difficult work of making a difference in our community. I think Nehemiah's story goes a long way to helping us to envision that. I'm going to go turn our attention to one more scripture in this last lecture, and then you can begin to respond to the breadth of information that I've given so far in this series of lectures.